Well, hello there, I'm Jacob.
And I'm Luke.
We are the Obi Thorin Alliance, and in today's video, we are doing the Shrink Next Door on Apple TV+. Like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment down below your thoughts if you enjoyed the Shrink Next Door or not. It's basically a true story with Will Farrell and Paul Rudd playing Marty and Ike, spanning a 27-year friendship starting from 1981 to 2010. And how this relationship starts is Marty's feeling a little bit down, and his sister Stella is feeling that he needs some help to, feel a little bit better about himself. So that's how the relationship starts. And where you can find The Shrink Next Door is on Apple TV+, and it contains 8 episodes ranging from 40 to 50 minutes a piece. Did you like that time with the episodes?
Yeah, 8 episodes was a good amount. Follows a therapist taking advantage of a wealthy client and utilizing their wealth to basically improve his life. It's a really interesting true story, one that I hadn't heard of previously. So ultimately, Marty, who is a wealthy Jewish man who's inherited money from his family, goes to see Paul Rudd, as mentioned, who's Dr. Ike, to help with his anxiety. In the beginning, it seems like he's really helping him make strides, but once Ike realizes that Marty has money, he starts to want things that he was jealous of that he didn't have as a kid, and wants to live this lifestyle through Marty by convincing him that he should have parties and it's good for him, and that he should buy these things for them because it'll be good for him, and starting a foundation because it'll be good for him. But ultimately, Ike is the only one that seeks to gain from this relationship. And throughout the 8 episodes, we can see this, but Marty is clearly brainwashed and doesn't see it, to eventually him seeing it from our perspective, the perspective of others, and leading towards a fairly climactic end of their friendship, and then somewhat what proceeds after that. Moving beyond that, any more would probably give away what happens. Being a true event, you may already know what happens. If you haven't, like we didn't, and we just watched the show purely for entertainment value, I wouldn't want to spoil any more of how it comes about. But
I think the performances, I think they made a great choice with who they cast. I can imagine anyone else. And Paul Rudd is such a person that you love his performance, and he seems like a good person. But in this performance, you just love to hate him, and it's different. It makes you feel a lot of things, the show, a lot of emotions, and I would highly recommend, if you feel uncomfortable about people being mistreated and things like that, it's probably not the show for you. But I still would recommend seeing how the show, because eventually it does have a conclusion, so I think it's worth going through that journey.
The acting performances were the best part of it, I think. One, the storyline was interesting, but it did have its slow points, which is something that I regret doing. I actually kind of lost interest through watching it. Had a bit of a break and then came back to it and really liked how it finished, and I regret not watching it, in a closer span where I kind of felt like I forgot some of the things by the time I got around to finishing off the season. So if you're watching it and you feel that it's dragging on and getting a bit boring, definitely continue with it, because it's worth it. And obviously the pacing of the show is, for its effect. This is a cool story, but it's not action-packed. You know, there is going to be slow moments, so persist through it. And I think seeing these two actors play roles that are not their usual funny comedic side was really good to see. We know they have the ability to, but I think this went another notch, especially with Paul Rudd. I think being someone that seems so likable to portraying someone that you really hate was a really interesting change, and I think he did a really good job of doing that for me, that he was able to still convince me that he was a bad person, he was hateable, even though he's someone that, as an actor, I love so much. We've got a new system for giving a rating and a verdict. Should we give a little debrief of what we're doing and why?
Yeah.
So we've moved to a new rating system. Before we were giving, out of 5 stars. We thought that giving something out of 5 stars was, maybe not fair, because there was a lot of shows that we were giving 3.5 stars, 4 stars, but ultimately there was still a difference between 2 shows that had the same rating. So we wanted to move to a new system that would allow shows and movies to differentiate a bit more. So now it's a percentage score, and we have a list of criteria that we use based upon what we think is fitting for the show. So for instance, this being a limited series, it's going to have different criteria that a movie would have or wouldn't have. It's going to, being a true story miniseries opposed to a fictional one, will have different criteria. For instance, we consider whether it was factual, where, if this wasn't a true story, we might consider other things like did we think it was believable? Was it, things that, being a true story, we can't determine or isn't fair to rate them on. So this new system, we have several criteria, it's about 20 different ones, and we give it a score out of 10. And from that, we then give it a percentage score out of the total value. So would you like to tell us what you gave this what percentage did you rate this show?
83% out of 100. I think over all the categories, I think the thing that stood out was the performances from the 2 leading people. I think that was the main thing that stood out to me. I think everything else was important, but I don't think if they nailed the casting choice, I think the show would have failed. So I gave the casting choice and performance a 10, and I think that's what really stood out in the 83%, and I think it deserves that score. I think it holds up really well, and as a limited series, I gave it a 4 within the score, and I think it deserves that score hands down. It makes you feel so many emotions, and I think it hands up is well worth watching television. I think the only problem is that me and Luke did the same thing. Basically watched the first 3 episodes when it first came out, and then got busy with other things, and then unfortunately came back to it. I think it would have been better to watch it continuously. I think it's well worth doing the opposite if you haven't already, and then eventually do it. Yeah.
Interestingly, with this new rating system, I end up landing on the exact same score as Jacob, which was 83%. But we did give different scores in different categories, but in the end, it ended up averaging out to be the same. I totally agree with what Jacob said, that the acting performance was where it scored really well. The casting obviously really helped with that. I think this show, without the star power it had, probably I either wouldn't have given it a watch, or I would have given up. It was just those parts where it got a bit slow, knowing that these 2 actors wouldn't take on a project unless they were certain it was a story worth telling. I think I would have, dropped off. But knowing that they continued made me think there's going to be something good about this that's worth watching. So I think that they were very smart in their casting choice, because I think it would not have had the success it has. I enjoyed the order they did things. It would swap between more recent dates and older dates, but I think that they explained it well, and every time they went back in time, it linked to what was going to happen next in the storyline really well. I think they built good suspense with the opening scenes, with seeing Will Ferrell digging and burying something in a backyard with blood on his hands, to not knowing what happened in real life, thinking, has he just murdered someone? And building that suspense to eventually, when we get to that point, it being a really cool twist in the story. So I think it did in terms of editing and the pacing and the way that they ordered things, I think they did a really good job compared to some other limited series which I think failed. This one did a good job of that. So I gave it 83%, Jacob gave it 83%. So let's move on to some talking points. This is going to feature some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the show yet, maybe tune out at this point. One of the first talking points we discussed earlier we were coming up with was the acting performances. We touched on it, but let's tell us what you loved about the acting performances.
I just love that, you know, Will Ferrell and Paul Rudd are known for, you know, doing comedic projects. Like Paul Rudd is famous for being on Friends and playing Ant-Man at the moment, but he's basically the villain of the show. And I hate him so much in the show, but he's such a likable person, and that's what human beings are. He played Ike so well that I don't know if I'll see him the same in the next Ant-Man movie.
Yeah, the performances were stellar, and the fact that in the first few episodes you actually really liked Ike as well, that he was able to make you go on this roller coaster of liking a character to absolutely despising them. I think that really showed his range as an actor. And Will Ferrell was fairly consistent through the show, but he did a good job of playing this. Well, originally he was meant to be 39 to eventually being in his mid-60s. This, you know, this caring, loving guy that just suffered from anxiety and unfortunately didn't really have a family of his own, and then was taking advantage of someone that seek to gain from his wealth, really. Well, you asked me before if I thought this was a story worth telling.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think it was a story worth telling? Do you think if this never became a book and a movie, would that have bothered you, or are you glad that they made it into a show?
Well, I guess I would have known about it and life continues going on, but I'm glad that they decided to make it into a show, because now I know about it and learn from it. And I think it's important that we did learn something from it, is that even though there's someone in that profession, a psychiatrist is supposed to be professional, but once it came known to him that he was wealthy, he changed as a person, and unfortunately greed is a problem.
Same. Like I think it was a really good story. I'm glad that has been told, because there's a lot of people that do get taken advantage of by therapists or professionals. Maybe not to this extreme, but it brings to light that don't put all your faith in one person, because your best interest may not be at heart. One thing about the story that I was a bit iffy on was I thought I was really hoping that the wife would intervene a bit more. Like she wasn't made to be hated, but she could see what Ike was doing, but continued to not step in. But maybe that was the fact that she was under his control also.
I think the point was that also that point as well, but I think she had her, you know, she basically had to pay her money for the babysitter, and once she got used to that lifestyle, she liked it. So at the start she was like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this and this, and then got used to it.
Having not been there, how likely or factual do you think these events really were? Did anything in it you go, that couldn't have happened, that's not right?
I guess I sort of believe it, but without being there myself, you do somewhat question it. But, you know, you do see the picture at the end of them both, so they were real people.
Yeah, I think some things I reckon were probably, you know, to the extreme, like whether or not the tipping point was actually the fish dying. I don't know whether that's just a cool story to add as like a reason. The part where the lady got left on the bus, like they abandoned the bus and then left her at a service station. Did that happen? We don't know. Maybe it did. It was like, that's one point. I think maybe it was just a cool thing to add to the story. The buying of the baseball for the amount of money they bidded on it, again, maybe that could have happened, but whether or not that's just a cool story to add. Maybe they overplayed Marty at the parties, how he was always just sitting in the quiet and like cooking. Like I feel like someone would have known that it was his house, or he would have stood in. But maybe that's really what happened. Maybe he was really under Ike's spell that much that he just did whatever he said. I'm fairly certain that in the last episode where his sister Phyllis breaks the car windows, and then he comes out, Dr. Ike, and he goes, "Wrong car, you broke Marty's." I don't think that happened. I think she would have known what her brother's car was, because I'm fairly certain they drove there together in the car to his place, or when she pulled up, she would have seen that car there. So I reckon that was added just for comedic value. I don't know if she actually did break the wrong car's window.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it does give you a warning at the start of the show that some things were, exaggerated for the purpose of entertainment. Other question. Do you think... what do you think was the most shocking part in the show?
I would say when Marty was... made to be forced to the whole circle of events, the bubble effect of when Ike was unfortunately going through when he lost his father, and then Marty was that nice of a person. They offered his house, and then he moved to the guest room. And instead of Ike going, "Well, I've spent my time here," he's like, "Oh, I'll get my creative juices of abuse and kind of go, well, I'll start writing a book." And then it all started. And then when he basically planted the seed of chopping down the trees so they could start the party, so probably that little cycle of storytelling.
I reckon the thing that shocked me the most, or I thought that kind of, shock's the best way to explain it, is, mentioned it earlier, but there's a scene where there's, Marty is convinced by Dr. Ike to we need to liven up this party, have a few drinks, we need party Marty out, have a few drinks. So he sculls a few drinks and he goes, this, because he knows he has a kind of a crush on this girl. He goes, "Oh, why don't you get, she likes a good joke, she likes the party, go push her in the pool." So he goes and tackles her in the pool. And then he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, the alcohol took over." And Ike's like, "Well, it was non-alcoholic. Like, why would you do that?" And then Marty then takes care of this girl, and she goes, "I'm not angry at you. It's what Ike does. He's done this. He made me stop talking to my family. He made me stop talking to my mother. My mother died, and I didn't get to say goodbye to her. He's a bad man." And then even then, Marty still defends him. And then he then goes to an extreme of doing a favour for him, where they're on the bus and they paid the bus driver to pretend like there's a break, the malfunction in the bus, and then he asks her to walk with him to the nearest service station to ask for help, and then he runs off and leaves her there. And we don't see what happens after that, but he abandons her, all because of the advice of Ike to do that. And then a few other events, when he goes back to speak to this girl he had a crush on, and he starts to realise that Marty basically told everyone that was good for him to stay away from him.
Ike, yeah. Yeah,
so Marty starts to realise what a bad person Ike is. So that was kind of the chain of those events, which was the most shocking thing for me. What was your favourite part of the show?
Favourite part of the show is I guess at the beginning when you feel like, oh, this is actually a genuine relationship, and then the turning point was when the hour was up, and then Marty was like, oh no, I'll pay for the next hour, and then Ike realized he could take advantage of him, and then I guess the next moment was when Marty was actually being assertive and said yes of moving to New Jersey with the branch when Ike was like, no, we shouldn't do it. He's like, no, yes.
I think my favourite part is more like an overall performance. I'm thinking Paul Rudd's performance was the favourite part of the show, and the way that they portrayed things like you mentioned, like his session would go a few minutes over and he'd be like, oh, well, Marty, you're going to have to fix me up for that. Like he takes Marty to run errands with him and they go play basketball, and then he's like, oh, I'm going to have to charge you for that. And like just how greedy he is about money. And then eventually finding out that he, over the course of the 30 years, spent, I think it was $3.5 million he paid for all these sessions and time with Dr. Ike, which is crazy money that he spent on him, especially given the time when they started, how much that adds up to. So, my favourite part is the overall performance of Paul Rudd. Would you make any changes to this? It was factual, so you can't really change. But is there anything you would have edited or liked to have seen added to the show?
I did say in the previous video that we did of the show, I didn't understand why they started in 2010. That would have been the change that I would have made, but now it actually makes sense. It's clever that they did that. It shows progression because it shows a different perspective, and now it actually makes sense. So that would have been the change, but now probably not, no.
You mentioned off camera that you would have liked to see maybe a flashback to Ike's childhood.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, why would you like to see that?
I don't know, I just feel like the main problem with Ike is that he feels that his life was just unjust, and he feels like Marty's a rich person that was... his mother just kept him down, and it's like, well, I think it would have been cool to see Ike's maybe upbringing of how he was treated so we could empathise with Ike more. It just came across that Ike was just, you know, we all wish we could have more money and, you know, have a greater life. Well, we don't all have houses in the Bahamas and stuff like that, but to make Marty cut down the tree because you want parties and to feel good, it just felt like I couldn't sympathise with his motives. It just would have made sense in my opinion.
Yeah, I think a flashback or a bit of a understanding of his childhood would have been nice, because he does talk about how he, you know, missed out on certain things and didn't get to have this fancy bar mitzvah that Marty did. But maybe in doing that, we would have then sympathised with him, which would have
not the point.
Which would have humanised him, and which we don't want. They wanted him to come across as a villain.
Yeah.
I probably would have liked to see maybe one more episode of the court case and the proceedings, or it wasn't really a court case, but the lengths he went through to get Dr. Ike disbarred and to lose his licence, and then maybe even, I don't know, like what led to them this book or movie, or like book or mini series, because it was a book first. So I'm assuming that at some point either Marty approached someone or someone approached Marty to ask to write or to have permission to write this. So I would have maybe liked to have seen that incorporated into the show.
So you think 10 episodes would have been better?
I don't know about 10, but somehow just adding a few extra scenes, whether that added extra episodes or just made each episode a bit longer, but they would have been... I'm just left with a few questions that I guess I'll now have to do my own research, but I always like it when they do incorporate it, or maybe even, you know, at the end they showed like a few, like, oh, this is where they are now and this is what's happening. Maybe just a bit more there would have been cool, because I have questions now that I desperately want to know the answer to. Any final things you want to add to this or say before we finish up the video?
I definitely think it goes through the emotional punches. It definitely, what a journey the two people had, 27 years to be with a psychiatrist and to the lengths that Ike would go to whenever someone would get close to Marty, especially the scene when Ike was just bidding on the baseball. Marty was like, no, 12 grand, 11 grand, and then Ike already spent 20 grand, but there was a point to it. That 20 grand was going towards his kids going to school. That was really the point to it. So yeah, it definitely makes you feel a lot of things, emotional abuse, and I've definitely felt very uncomfortable, but yeah.
Yeah, my final thought to be, don't give up on it, persist and watch it. Brilliant performances for a true story about a topic that was so gripping and interesting. I think it did a really good job. Great casting, good editing and pacing. I think 83% is a really good score from both of us. Probably one of the best things on Apple TV. Apple TV has been a bit of a letdown. It's been hit and miss with things so far, so this is a shining light for what's on Apple TV.
And Ted Lasso Morning Wars?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking for something, a quick watch, something that's a true story, it's a no-brainer. Give this a watch. It's, on par with other mini-series like When They See Us, or maybe even, it's better than Tiger King, but it's in the same kind of realm. So I would definitely suggest watching it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for helping, Luke. Hope you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe. See you in the next video. Let the force be with you. Bye-bye.